Well, look, we're all here because whether we work in a school or whether we work alongside of schools, we're committing to ensuring that every school is what Robert Keegan calls a deliberately developmental organisation. And that means wherever we are right now in our journey of building better professional learning structures and cultures, all of us are playing a role as teachers, as mid-level leaders, as school leaders, as system leaders, as those supporting school improvement in system roles. We're all asking, what is it going to take to build really thriving cultures of learning, not just for the adults, but for the students in the room? If we haven't worked together personally before, my name's Dr. Simon Breakspear, and I spend most of my time thinking about applying research and getting it to actually be useful and implemented in schools. Almost 9 years ago, I kicked off a project with many schools in New South Wales and in Alberta as well, and we called that the Sprints Project that came to become the Teaching Sprints Project. And for a long time, I was trying to work out how could we help educators who are busy and overloaded work through simple processes in their teams for learning about evidence, applying that for 2 to 4 weeks in their context through deliberate practice, and then reviewing it. But back in 2019, 2020, one of the big challenges we face as a community is finding easy to use summaries, translated approaches that could help us understand collectively as teams the evidence-informed practices that we're working on. And this is where online I came across the wonderful work that Tom Sherrington, as a former head teacher, as an author, and as someone who's dedicated most of the last 5 to 7 years to really enhancing the quality of professional learning, both in England, but again, now around the world. And through, firstly, his synthesis and summary of Rosenshine's principles of instruction, and then through his collaboration that has led to the teaching walkthroughs, what we have found here is what we've been missing, which is a wonderful codification of good quality practice that's grounded and aligned with the cognitive science that pulls together what master teachers have been doing in classrooms for years, but it makes it accessible and usable for teacher teams working through sprint type methodologies to instructional coaches, and indeed across an entire school looking to lift the quality of the work. And so in 2022, we finally got together as the pandemic kind of died down. Tom came out to Australia. We met up with 600 or so of our friends across Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. And we really deepened this collaboration, drawing on Tom's deep expertise and what he's learning working alongside over 2,000 schools in the walkthroughs community. And so as I start to think about what we're collectively building, all of us on the call, well over 200 joining in live and well over 500 registered for our time together, what we're all looking to do in some ways is to really bring together the what, the how, and the where of professional growth cultures in our schools. That Tom really found for me what I was missing in our community, which was really good quality, evidence-informed practices that were codified, easy to begin a good quality conversation about. So to the how can we, through instructional coaching, through quality team-based sprint-like processes and other professional learning approaches, how can we help mobilize the best evidence that we've got and truly build adaptive expertise, not just routine implementation of the things in front of us? And lastly, where? What are the kind of cultures we need to build as teams and as organizations where teachers can feel psychologically safe and actually well connected to the work, such that they see working through cycles of evidence-informed practice as just a weekly, monthly, or termly part of the job that they have in front of them? Not because anyone's trying to fix them, not because anyone's trying to make them into a teacher they're not, because they're trying to offer that opportunity that every teacher should get a little bit better at their craft based on evidence each and every term. So we're thrilled to let you know that we're coming back together live in October. We are going to be in Sydney and Melbourne. For anyone who'd love to join us, we'd love for you to come to a really special live event. We're going to be pushing some new ideas. We're going to be collaborating and co-constructing some things. We're going to be drawing on case studies right here from Australia. And we're going to be thinking about where we're up to as schools and as systems trying to build this kind of professional growth culture. So Tom, with that as a long introduction, it is so wonderful to have you coming in this morning from London. So let me bring you up here and just ask you, how are you? What are things like as you kind of are deep into spring and almost into summer, whilst those of us down in the Southern Hemisphere are complaining about our winter?
Well, I mean, we're at that point of year where people are definitely looking ahead to next year already because they're thinking they've got sort of a few weeks left to go. But then all the schools I'm going to are saying we're just getting our head around September, and it's a great time to plan because you start thinking you can start messing around with timetables and things like that. But there's an appetite. I mean, everything I do, I find I meet teachers who are just so interested in this whole thing of what does research say? How do I use it in the classroom? And I sense there's a real shift in schools in the UK, certainly where cultures are changing and professional growth cultures are way more at the forefront now. And people are trying to get rid of these old sort of accountability systems that are kind of a bit locked in, but people are trying to deconstruct them and make them better. So I think we're in a really good place with that.
Fantastic. Well, Tom, we're so pleased that you've joined us live. First thing your morning here on a Wednesday. What I want to do, everyone, is hand over to Tom to give us a bit of an update on his thinking and the work that he's leading through and with the Walkthroughs community. Many of us on the call might well be Walkthrough schools. Let us know if you're part of that. Many of us will have the Walkthroughs books, and some of us might be newish to that work. What I love about it is there really is an opportunity here to move beyond broad statements of being evidence informed and to have some practical approaches. So, Tom, I'm going to hand over to you. I'm going to encourage if people have comments and things they want to find points of connection to, that they drop that into the chat bar as we go. We've also got a Q&A tab that you'll see at the bottom. And if you would like to add in the Q&A tab any specific ones, please feel free to do that. But Tom, why don't you give us a bit of an update about your thinking, how you're thinking through the next phase of building these types of professional growth cultures? Over to you.
Okay, so the type of share I'm doing it is I'm going to share these slides. This is the theme of the webinar that we advertise: power of a core set of teaching techniques. And I think this is something which I find has just been a really useful way of framing a professional learning approach in schools is to think of what teachers have in common more than what they have, what the differences are. And that's supported by the fact that when you go into lessons, I go into schools all the time, and I go in typically, let's say, in an hour, I'll see 3 or 4 teachers, and then we talk about what we've seen with the person I'm with. And that could be, say, the head of department is with me and we watch four people in their team, or it could be, in primary school, the head of a phase of year groups. And we often end up talking about what was common, even if we didn't set out to be. We're not all saying, oh, well, that teacher did this, but that teacher did that. We're often saying, gosh, it's interesting how we just have these common issues. And aside from the fact that we always end up talking about how complicated teaching is, there's a lot going on. And we're trying to formulate a professional learning agenda. So how do we move forward? How do we support teachers to improve? It doesn't really help if every teacher feels they've been sort of picked off and that they're individually being sort of critiqued. We find it's much more healthy to say, we got problems to solve. These are real problems. How do you check for understanding across a whole class? How do you know how 25 or 30 children are doing at the same time? How do you hold attention of 30 children who have mind wandering and also explain how to add fractions and so on? These are not easy things to do. So before we get into sort of critiquing and saying the teacher should have done this or the teacher should have that, we have to sort of say, well, what does it look like to do it well? And how do we even describe that? So what we found is that it's so healthy to start from a mindset of solving problems rather than judgment, and then to recognize how common those problems are, because then you get this sense of solidarity and collective action. And although we'll talk about it in a minute, that instructional coaching and one-to-one processes can be very useful, they only really work, in my experience, when there's also a strong team culture where people feel part of something together. And then the coaching can push that on, but It can't do it on its own. So when we what we're trying to do is we're going to say, well, how do we describe the problem? We need a language which says this is what the problem is, and so we can understand it together. And here's what a solution is. And if we can't even describe what's happening, it's really difficult to then think of the solutions because everyone has their own sense of things. So the idea of this webinar is really to say, well, the power of a course of techniques is to go to some trouble to, before we even do the professional development and worry about individual teachers, is to say, well, let's have a kind of a school-centered understanding of what the challenges are so we can talk about them all the time. It's akin to me, I use this analogy a lot. You could say I probably milk it because I find it so useful, and I kind of I just found it has helped me a lot in the last year or so. Because people sometimes think anytime you write something down or codify it or say this is how it's done, if they're worried that you're going to start hemming me in, you're going to start making me do stuff I don't want to do. And I would say, well, no, well, we're not doing that. What we're doing is we're like jazz musicians, say. If you study jazz, you do actually study it. You learn things. You learn standard rhythms, standard tunes, and chord sequences and scales. And all the musicians have an understanding of that. So they can be playing together, and someone just kind of gives a nod, and they all know, okay, we're going to move to this, and they know what that is, and they know what to deviate from. And when they go off sort of meandering away from the main tune, they know how to come back to the main tune because that's well understood between them. So they wouldn't be able to do that if they didn't have a really good shared understanding of what the core kind of ideas were. It'd just be noise, wouldn't it? So there's a really, even something very expressive like music, we create from a shared platform. And in tennis, tennis is great because it's a good analogy for responsiveness, that you practice tennis skill by skill. You learn tennis, you do a whole bunch of forehands, over and over again, and then backhand over and over again. But that's not how you play the game. When you play the game, you link those ideas together. But if I was going to coach a group of tennis players, the obvious thing is to say, well, no, here are a few techniques that you're going to need. And once you know them, you're going to be then using them to respond in the moment. And it's about which stroke to use and when and how. And you become expressive and creative because you have the skills to be expressive and creative. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, well, what are those techniques then? And it's all about sort of the idea of being research informed. Isn't that research tells you what to do? I mean, I've got my little booklet here, which this came out almost exactly 5 years ago. This little red booklet, and that is, Rosenshine's principles of instruction are not a instruction manual. What they're saying is, look, we've observed teachers who are doing a good job, who seem to be getting good outcomes. This is what they do. He's describing what teachers do, not telling teachers what to do. And that's the spirit of it. So a research engaged kind of a process is about understanding what studies have shown, understanding some kind of learning model, which is then the diagram there. But then you have to translate that into the habits that you use in the classroom day to day to day. And that's actually quite a long path. I mean, represented on that graphic there, you could have the most beautiful CPD library. It could have all the books. I get new books all the time. Literally, I've got this as a prop just because it's the latest book I've got, which is by Alex Quigley. It's called Why Learning Fails and What to Do About It. It's absolutely superb. But imagine I bought that and I gave it to people. Well, there's quite a lot of work to do before that changes anyone's practice or before any children benefit from that. You have to have a sense of like a forum, a process where those ideas are explored, turned into concrete techniques or actions that a teacher can take. And not just once, but then ultimately it changes the whole way they think about teaching, so that they're doing that every time they're in the classroom, not just sort of because they feel they should at key moments. So we need a system which does that. So even when you're trying to be super research engaged, we have to think about the actions that follow from that. And what I find with this set of core techniques is that you then need that to inform all the kind of observation processes. So if I'm recording a lesson and videoing it and showing it to a colleague, or if they're coming to watch me teach, and then when we're sitting side by side, in every one of those scenarios, we have to have a language for the exchange. So what are we looking at? What are we seeing? And if we don't have a common language for that, every grouping of people in the school is making it up their own way. And that can be a problem. So the reason for having a core set of techniques is so that every interaction you're having related to your professional learning has a kind of starting point which is common. Now, I try to simplify the coaching process down to this. When I meet a teacher after a lesson, I've got two jobs. One of them is I need to make them feel good. Like no one wants to go and sit next to someone and then leave 20 minutes later feeling terrible or worse than they arrived. Why would you do that to somebody? You've got to arrive feeling like, yeah, great, let's go and let's do that thing. We're up for it. But up for what though? The second job is you have to have a plan of action. You have to have a kind of, okay, so instead of doing that, or rather than that, I'm going to do this. This is the thing I need to think about in my lessons, and it's going to be different from before. That's why it's going to be better. So what is that thing? How do I get to that crux of it? How do I get to that element of action? When I'm talking to a teacher, when I get to talk to a teacher, and we're thinking about the lesson, even like you saw me teach, I saw you teach, or you came into my lesson, I was doing the lesson. My head was like front of class doing the lesson, but you came in and watched it. We have different perspectives on the same event. Even then, we needed like a way of describing that and moving it on. And you scale that up. So that's just with one person. What I think is really important to think about when you're doing PD across the whole school is it works at 3 levels. You've got whole school stuff. You've got things where everyone comes together. So we're all talking about teaching as a whole group of staff. And sometimes that's really useful. Then it goes into teams, and then it goes into individuals. If you zoom in, it actually looks like this. Really busy. So this is my deliberately complicated looking slide. This is the reality of the school. Look at that. You've got multiple team meetings. You've got lots of different team meetings happening simultaneously. And then in between that, you've got hundreds of interactions between teachers. Now, if all of those things is like a kind of random people talking about this, some people talking about that, describing it in different ways, you get this sort of miscommunication, you get ideas being distorted. And that initial training session, which one of your teachers or a visitor came and delivered this great session where it felt like really clear, everyone understood what the thing was, quickly kind of just morphs into all kinds of versions of it because there's not enough clarity, there's not enough coherence to it. So what you want is that whenever these things are happening, whenever these different types of things are happening, and you can have different models in a school, these represent different models. What you want is for whatever model you have, for there to be this shared understanding of the teaching. So on the left there, you've got like multiple pairs of people being coached. Then you've got in the middle a team just meeting, or on the right you've got a team with a coach or a pair with a coach. If in every scenario you devise in your school, there's this core set of techniques that everyone knows, you just get coherence to things which might not otherwise be there. And in particular, this is the model which I feel is the one I always try to describe in more detail, is a sort of team approach. So this is how it works. That team of teachers has this core set of techniques that they all understand. They know what they are. They know how to do them. the gender then stops being what should we do. It becomes, are we doing it well? And that's to be in a good place. But you can't discuss what are we doing it well if you haven't discussed what we're doing. So we discuss what we want to do and why, because it's solving a problem. And then when we're generating feedback through lesson observations or video, there's a common language which informs that. Then we come to meet again and we say, right, so how's it going? And again, the core techniques of the agenda. And you just get traction. You get, okay, so because we're talking about the same thing, we're moving ourselves on. And then we can reframe that agenda and say, right, that's the bit we're not getting right. It's that little step there. Those are some examples where it was working well. So we should keep doing that bit. But that bit where it's kind of going wrong still, and let's work on that. And within the technique, we get detail. So defining the techniques is really, really useful. And there are lots of different models. So, you know, this flow that you see there could apply to lots of different situations. And it's fair to say there are lots of different alternative models. But the basic idea is that the reason for having a shared set of techniques is so that that circuit is informed by the shared language. And I have to say, in my experience doing this, it's the most powerful thing. Once teachers know what you mean when you say think, pair, share exactly, you can start talking about whether to do it properly or not. And if each of those people has a slightly different idea of what you mean when you say think, pair, share, it's just a woollier conversation. The actions are woollier. When I'm observing you, I think I'm looking for this. You think you're doing that. When you video yourself and you critique your own video or each other, I think, oh, I see I was doing it there. And I'm thinking, oh, no, you weren't, because we're not even agreeing what it is we're looking for. So agreeing on what things are is so important. Otherwise, we lose so much energy. So we have this idea of a playbook. Now, Jim Knight, who is the kind of guru of instructional coaching, he just says this. He says, instructional coaches run the risk of being inefficient if they don't have a repertoire of effective practices to share. So we need to have that playbook. And in the walkthroughs, when we first wrote it, although we sort of sometimes wished we hadn't, because it's not just about coaching, but it does actually say on the tagline for walkthroughs, a guide to instructional coaching. So we originally thought this is what it's for. It's a playbook. So when you have a technique called check for understanding, it's got 5 steps, and you can start describing that. And this is one of the tennis plays. So what we then realize is that describing one technique is not really enough. And really, when you're describing any technique, you have to remember to tell people that it's one of many. So like in tennis, you know, it's the shot combinations which make you a good player. And say, to use another sporting analogy, the word play comes from sport. So football, American football or basketball, there are literally playbooks where you literally look up like diagrams. We actually made this. Well, Oliver, my colleague, made this. But a play means a kind of recognized solution to a recognized problem. So if we're in this situation, here's a play we can use, and everyone knows what you mean. So when you just say we're going to do that play and it's got a name, everyone knows where to go, what moves to make, because it's understood. We don't have to describe it every time it comes up. We just define the play, and then we discuss when to use the play. So this is the whole purpose of it, and we need to then find ways of doing it. So where do these plays come from? Well, there are lots of situations. So the Rose and Shine, for example. Oh, that's slightly. I'll just stretch that across there because that's going to annoy me. There we go. Rose and Shine's principles. You know, he has some ideas. But his things are sort of quite broad though. So questioning, for example, ask questions, or how and when and what sorts of questions. So it's useful as a broad overview. Reviewing material. He talks about daily review and weekly and monthly review. But how exactly do you do a daily review? Sequencing concepts and small steps, modeling and scaffolding. Each one of those is a big thing. So actually, the umbrella, these are umbrella concepts, and really to have a defined set of techniques, you need to go lower than that. And there are other sources. I mean, there's some fantastic sources you might look at. For example, Making Every Lesson Count. Making Every Lesson Count is a brilliant book. Again, a good framework for teaching. You've got the Great Evidence Toolkit, the evidence review from Great Teaching Toolkit, Evidence-Based Education, EBE. This is fantastic, and they've got a whole thing. So there are lots of different sources. Rosenshine, Making Every Lesson Count. You could look at Dylan Williams' strategies. But even he, then when you talk to Dylan Williams, you know, he's very clear to say that these are not techniques, they are strategies. So, for example, elicit evidence of learning. I mean, that's how, you know, what techniques do we use? So these are still quite high level ideas. Students as learning resources for another, it's an important idea, but how do I do that? So we feel like in the walkthroughs world, we felt like these frameworks are brilliant, but you need to go lower than that to the more granular steps on techniques, which are much more actionable. So to give you, for instance, here's a set of questioning. So this is a classic kind of cluster. This is like a kind of check for understanding playbook. If I want to check for understanding in the classroom, I've got a few things I'm looking at, and one of the sort of super summaries that I refer to this in every training session I do is this diagram here. How do I make teaching that's complicated seem simple? Well, this is the simplest version I've ever come up with. Well, it's just I have to have this sort of running monitoring process in my head. I have to have this sense of checking in. Is everyone thinking? How do I know? Like, how do I run the room so that everyone is thinking, not just a few children, like everyone? Because if they're not thinking, they're not learning. So I've got little Stevie over there in the corner. If he's not thinking about what I'm talking about, he's not learning it, essentially. So I need him to be thinking. It doesn't matter how keen these guys here are. If that kid isn't thinking, they aren't learning. I need everyone thinking. So I need to make that real. When I've explained something, or they've listened to a story or read a book, did they understand it? Like, did they make meaning from it in their own head? How do I know? Like, how do I find that out? What are they showing me, which tells me that they've understood it? And that, again, everyone. So I can't check meaning by asking 2 children on its own. I need that will give me a sample, but is it an accurate sample? And then the last one, practice. Unless they use the knowledge and use it more than once, a few times, they're not going to be consolidating it and probably remembering it. So is everyone practicing? Not just a few. Again, if I teach you a new word and only 3 children use it in a sentence because they're the only ones I ask, the others didn't practice it, so they probably won't. They'll probably forget it. So this is a simplified version. And then when we come to this, we're saying, so here's the techniques that might deal with that. Checking for understanding is the agenda, and then the techniques are then show me boards, cold calling, and think, pair, share. Now, at the moment, they just look like labels on a hexagon, but of course, underneath that, we describe them in detail. So the way this works with the walkthroughs, and again, I've come to schools where they try to make these things up themselves. Cold calling is this. Now, cold calling is debated relentlessly because if you don't do it well, it can be problematic. If you do it well, it's a gift. It makes your teaching inclusive. You have inclusive classrooms because everyone's thinking and everyone's ready to answer and they feel included. But you have to do it in a certain way. So this is our definition and walkthroughs. You are just to explore this one. You ask the class a question so that everyone feels asked. It's very important. This first step. You're very precise. We don't do questions where we say, Simon, what do you think? Blah blah blah. Simon's the only one that's asked. I certainly don't say, guys. Okay, who would like to tell me? Who could tell me? Why does it rain? It's raining now here. Why does it rain? Who thinks they know? Hand up. Simon, thanks for putting your hand up. Why do you think? And Simon gives me an answer. Teachers do that all the time. And it only makes the volunteers think, really. So we want to say, everyone, have a think. You know, you've done this before. We explained it last lesson. Something you should know. Why is it raining? Well, there it is. What's happening? See if you can think about it. Maybe give me 3 steps. Ask the class a question. Give some thinking time. Okay, so right, let's just see. Daisy, how did you get on? What was your explanation? Let's hear it. And I'm expecting her to know because we just did it, or they just discussed it, or they just watched the film. Or I'm not asking her to catch her out. I'm asking her because I'm thinking she should know, and I'm giving her a chance to share that. I listen to what she says, and then I respond to that. And the 4th step, whatever you say, I'm going to respond. I don't just go, nice, Daisy, and Sam, what about you? Nice. I say, Daisy, okay, that's interesting. So why does that happen? That bit there where the clouds forming, what was the word for that process? Fantastic. And I follow up. And what other types of precipitation are there, as well as rain? What else? How else does the water fall out of the sky? You know, whatever they say, I've got a response. And then finally, Daisy's given me a good account, to and fro a few times. She's the only one that said anything. So I don't know if anyone else even fully understood what Daisy was saying. So I'm going to check and say, okay, so Ibrahim, let's hear from you. You heard Daisy, you should have been listening. Like, what was your version? Let's hear you. And that's a cold call. We listen, everyone's ready to answer because they could be asked, but it's done in a kind of invitational way. We're supporting everyone's answers. We're not trying to catch kids out, and it makes everybody think. It's a great technique. That's what we mean when we say cold calling. We don't mean it's just no hands up. It's got structure to it. So when we're talking about that in a team, we're saying, how's your cold calling going? Or when I'm watching you, I've got that as an agenda. I've got that, and I can check that through and say, okay, interesting, because did you ask the class a question? Was everyone ready to answer? Are you always responding to their answers? Or do you just take the first thing they say and move on? Do you typically, how do you deal with a child who's got some anxiety? You've got to support them, haven't you? So do you know who those children are? How are you supporting them to give answers where they're confident? So things like writing the answers down on their board, and you can say, "Oh, Sam, that is brilliant. I love that. Do you want to share that? It's a great answer." And you do that with him, because unless you do that with him, he won't be confident. So that's what cold calling is. And then think, pair, share. Similarly, I mean, everyone thinks they can do a turn and talk, no problem, but actually defining it makes you do it better. So I'm upset. Currently, it's my total obsession is when I go into observe lessons, turn and talk, think, pair, share happens a lot. But when you actually listen to what some kids are saying to each other, it's not always good news. Sometimes it's pretty poor. So you think, okay, so why is that? It's because the structure of the question wasn't sufficiently clear about what to answer and what a good answer might look like. And they perhaps don't have the knowledge or some resources available to them to do it. So good think, pair, share. Of course, everyone has to have a talk partner. That needs to have some thought to it. The question should be something they can sustain a conversation with, something like, so a favorite question I saw recently was in an art lesson where they had some examples of some graffiti and photographs, and the kids had to discuss whether it was art or vandalism. And some of the students were having really good discussions. The boys in front of me, unfortunately, were just going, it's art. No, that's vandalism. No, it's not, it's art. No, that's vandalism. And they was just sort of like asserting. So there was no because the teacher didn't say, okay, so I want you to, and a good answer might be something like, I think that's art because although it's on a public building, the artist is expressing themselves and it has this value, and it's a creative product which has value to people, and despite the fact that it's a nuisance and might be washed off. So it's a evaluative language and a reason. So then the students would have known, but at least some of the other students knew how to do that more automatically. Thinking time, students thinking for themselves before they share. Often that's missed out. So have a think. What do you think before you? So when you're having dialogue, you're literally, here's my ideas. All right, what were your ideas? Those are my ideas. Let's share them, rather than let's talk at each other all at once, or you just tell me everything and I'll listen. So think, pair, share means everyone thinks, then they share, and then we share to the whole class. So circulation is needed to supervise and check in and make sure and listen to what children are saying. And the last one, the cold calling. If I know that when I'm talking to Simon, my talk partner, that in a minute the teacher might ask us to share our discussion, I'm doing it properly. And then also the teacher can hear some samples. So I could go into each of the steps. And show me boards is obviously the more obvious. I haven't got the walkthrough on this for this one, but it's like 3, 2, 1, and show me. We have a crisp technique, which everybody uses. I've got whiteboards behind me, knocking stuff off my shelf in the process. But things like 3, 2, 1, and show me, and I've got my working, and the teacher can see if I got the answer that I was expecting. So we can see everyone's answers at the same time. Now, once you've got these, for example, as your core techniques, and everyone knows what they are and can do them really well, then it's about when and how. Now, one of my favorite examples of this is a school in London where I saw a lesson where this is a teacher who was new to the school. It was her first year of teaching, in fact. It was actually her first year of teaching. Because these were their core techniques in the school, in her first week of the school, the induction program said, here are our core techniques, and these are the ones we use. And everyone knows how to do them. So show me boards, think, pair, share, cold calling as ways of checking for understanding. And I saw this lesson. This teacher had been teaching for 6 months. And she was asking her class, okay, we're doing fractions. You did fractions before. Let's see how we get on. So a quarter plus a fifth. How do I find out quickly if everyone knows how to do that? Well, show me boards. So everyone write down your answer. Don't show anyone. 3, 2, 1, show me. Okay, wow. And then she was smart. She said, okay, that's interesting. There are basically 3 answers I'm getting. She didn't tell them which was right or wrong. She just said, I'm getting 9/20ths, I'm getting 0.45, and I'm getting 2/9. So turn to your partner, have a think, which of those is the right answer. Now she decided they'd already done the thinking because they'd done it when they did the whiteboard. So she said, now share with your partner which answer you put, and then discuss which one you think is correct. So then all the students were talking. Well, it can't be 2/9 because blah blah blah, and it's 0.45 correct, and discussions. And then she said, okay, time up. Okay, write your answers down a second time. Now show me. What do you think the answer is? 3, 2, 1, and show me. And nearly every student had put 9/20ths second time. And she hadn't told them the correct answer. They had realized from the options and through the talk. And then she'd noticed some children who changed their mind, and she cold called them. She just said, okay, Stephanie, I noticed you changed your mind. Talk me through what your thought process was. And Stephanie then says, well, I put 0.45. That's a decimal. I did it like 0.2 plus 0.25, but I realized you wanted it in fractions. So I realized blah, blah, blah. She explained it. And then another child did the same. So the teacher in her first year of teaching ran like a 5 or 6 minute sequence of the lesson, which was absolutely fantastic. So every child was thinking, because they all had to show their answers. Every child got a chance to talk about mathematical reasoning, because they think, pair, share was done perfectly. And the teacher then was still making them think and sampling by getting the children to explain their answers through selecting cold calling. So each of those techniques was done really well because they'd been trained on them. The language was common. It was the maths department's core. And then then you compare that with another lesson you might see where the teacher literally just says, okay, guys, so who can tell me what's a quarter plus a fifth? And Simon puts his hand up and says, it's 9/20ths. Well done. Now that is like another universe of teaching, as far as I'm concerned. And yet that's quite common. The teacher thinks, I've got a question, I'll ask anyone, and a person answers, versus everyone thinks, everyone talks, everyone shows. It's a totally different scale of of engagement. And that is possible because the techniques were clearly expressed, well selected, and trained on. And that's what we're talking about here. So that started off in the training room. That started off with in that school. When it says decision 4, we have a few decisions schools need to make in our process, and one of them is who does the training, when does it happen, what's the content of the training? Because without good training, we feel coaching is sort of blind. You know, if we haven't shared a workshop or a training session where we have explored this technique, what are we even discussing? So those techniques that teacher used began life in the training room, modeled by somebody who showed that everyone how to do it. And see it, name it, do it is a technique where you sort of say, okay, I've shown you, right, mentally, like rehearse it. Now, what is the technique? What does it look like to do it well? And then you go and practice it. It started life there. Then it continued life in the team, the maths department in that case. All the teachers then discussing the technique. Then it continued into the cycle. So there you've got the team discussion about which questions do we do? When do we use the mini whiteboards? When do we? What's the value of talk in maths, and when do we do that? Like, we don't do it for everything, and so on. So it's all about appropriateness, but it's the language is core. So, of course, there's you might think, well, those techniques are an obvious ones to pick, and they are, but there are other options. So another part of this agenda is, once we want a core technique, well, what do we use? Well, because there are lots of questioning technique in walkthroughs. We have all of these techniques. You could have, class discussion is a technique for sequencing a whole lot of things in that discussion. Probing questions, process questions, say it again better. These are all names of techniques. Hands up for ideas. Now, one of the schools I worked with recently, they have gone through a process of deciding what their core is, and I'll show you a few of those. So this is a school, international school in Thailand. This is just an image of their thing here with I don't know why the squares have come on there, but they call it the Patina Core 7. Now, the way they devised this core was, this is a primary school. It's an 8-class primary school. It was quite big. The deputy head in charge of the teaching and learning selected 20 or so techniques, put them on the table, and they all had to discuss which ones do they think were going to be in the Patina Core 6. They were going for 6, and they suggested some each. And then he was putting them up on the board saying, yeah, that's a good idea, that's a good idea, that's a good idea. And then ended up with like too many, so they had to start saying, which ones do we take off? And eventually they couldn't agree on 6, so they called it 7. And I've been there now, and they've had that for 18 months, nearly 2 years. And you go into that school, positive relationships, really explicit stuff in that. Everyone thinks they know what that word means, but when you look at the walkthrough for it, it explains in some detail about, using names and very specific things, how you show the children. And it's about, demonstrating kindness and so on. Establish your expectations. That's about, as a routine to that. That's about, here's what we expect, communicating it to the students, checking they know the rules. So there's a process in that, which is hearing the children kind of reflect back to you what is expected. So what will excellence look like? What am I supposed to do? So the children have to show you that they've understood what you've said, and then you sustain that. Signal for attention, signal, pause, insist. Positive framing, is a whole way of correcting children. You do it or you don't, you learn it. So instead of saying, Michael and John, will you stop talking, please? You say, Michael, John, thank you, looking, listening, thanks. And it's like, Bill Rogers classic. But in that school, you just see it all the time. The teachers are explicitly, deliberately using positive framing. And then think, pair, share, check for understanding as a concept, and say it again better as a technique where you get the children to reframe their first answer with a better answer. And you do that kind of all the time. So it works really well. Everyone's doing it well. It's very embedded, and they've worked on it for a long time. Here's another one. This is the school we went to recently, and they just arrived at this. This is their cluster of core techniques, and they've got a central spine, positive relationships, make everyone think is kind of broad walkthrough, but it's about a set of processes which you're thinking always is everyone thinking. So, and it includes systematically involving everyone in questioning and helping children connect what they know to what you're teaching them. So a process in the learning where you're saying, okay, so try to explain it to yourself. So I've said something to you, what do you think it means? And getting everyone to deliberately connect. Coherent mapping is about a curriculum and making sure that the teachers have thought about the links between prior knowledge and what they're going to learn coming in the future. So that's more of a planning tool. But look, you can see the same ones on the right there. Show me boards, think, pair, share, check for understanding. That's their questioning cluster. That's their playbook for that scenario. And then on the left, sorry, you've got explaining and modeling. That's when I'm explaining. So modeling from the front, scaffolds to help children understand writing structures and maths procedures, and then metacognitive talk, which is about narrating your thinking, getting the children to narrate their thinking, getting the children to say, the answer is 9/20ths because, and this is my method, and how did I work that out? Because the lowest common multiple of 4 and 5 is 20, and they have to articulate their reasoning. So that agenda, to get good at that, will last them 2 years, I would say. Like, it's enough, they don't need more than that. If all the teachers are really good at all of that, they're rocking. That's not easy stuff. And it's so important not to think of these things as basic. So when I go back, if I go back to this setup here, there's something basic about that. You go into a classroom. The last time I went into a classroom and taught some physics, which is my subject, there's a group of 17-year-olds I've never met before. And straight away, I'm thinking, oh, okay, right, let's tee up some questions. And within about a few minutes, I'm thinking, okay, this is interesting. You guys are a bit shy. You don't really know this much. You think you're better than you are, and you keep talking. And I need to manage the room. I need to go, okay, so let's do show me boards, because I need to get a sense of everyone. So we'll go show me boards for this question. Okay, that's interesting. That's telling me something. I tell you what, let's discuss that. I want you to think more, and then we'll do a think, pair, share. So then I decide that. And I'm working it. I'm thinking on my feet. I'm thinking what to do next. It's not easy. It's like I'm a tennis player who's played tennis a lot, but I now have got a tough opponent and I have to think hard. I've got to respond. There's something easy about it. It's not basic. It's core. It's core. So I'm drawing on my core techniques. And at all times, although we've got these names, the steps in them are kind of what's holding me. It's the habits around that. So the last thing I'm going to share with you is like a tool we have on our website where we actually help people make these things. So we have this thing called the problem solution tool. Which techniques do we pick? Well, you need to actually start in the classroom and say, well, what problems do you see? Don't just start saying, here's a bunch of techniques, go and use these. We say, well, what problems do we see? And we've written down some common ones, like, how do I get all students' attention? Students are settling for mediocre work. How do I model key concepts and processes? How do I check what they know? And for each of these, it's an interactive tool. When I click on the page, how do I structure paired and group talk? If I click on that, it opens up a set of options that you might want to look at. So this is a class discussion, think, pair, share, collaborative learning. These are all some techniques that you might want to look at. If you're saying students lose interest quickly in instructional teaching, if I click on that, we've got hands-on, which is about concrete learning and using things that students are feeling and touching. Blend knowledge and experiences of walkthrough, about planning curriculums so that there are key experiential aspects to the learning. Again, it's engaging all the students in doing things. And then checking for understanding. And open response tasks, which is about occasionally giving the students opportunities to respond in a way they choose. And that's occasional, it's not something you do every day. It could be students have knowledge gaps. Well, let's have a look at checking for understanding, normalizing error, retrieval practice routines. And so we've got all these ideas, but they solve a problem. So what we encourage people to do is to say, well, look at your classrooms. What's happening when you watch lessons? What problems do you observe? And then select techniques which you think are going to be common to lots of people so that you can base your techniques around them and your core around it. And then different teams in a school might blend. So what often happens is you start off with quite a strong nucleus of techniques, and then people deviate from them for different teams. So we have whole groups of schools here. These are a whole bunch of schools, and then we work on these cluster builder things. And let's look at this one. They say Mellor School. This is their cluster tool, and this is their core. But what they've said is, like, this is their first year, and then after their first year, say that the year 5 and 6 team might add in this, and the year 1 the kind of early years team might add in something else. And so we start with a set of core ideas, and then later we'll deviate. And that's true in a secondary school. You often have, say, 3 or 4 techniques that every department uses, and then the maths department is adding in math specific ones, the English department is adding in English specific ones, but it's still useful to have a core. And I've got a whole bunch of them here, just from a school I've just been to recently. This is the PE faculty cluster. This is the key stage 1 cluster, because I've got primary and secondary. And this is the special, the SEND department cluster. So, each one, the performing arts cluster. So in each department made their own selection, and that's the way they wanted to do it. So that's the basic idea. If I go back to this, that the whole point of the core is that it just, I'll finish on this slide. Just the power is just so big. When everyone involved in those processes has the same focus, because they have the same problems and they have the same language for those problems, then I just think we see improvement happening more rapidly, because we don't waste energy constantly defining everything. We know what we mean. We know what it should look like. We've got models for that we formed through the training, and we're just trying to implement those models in the classroom. And you see teachers really deliberately, effortfully in a room going, I need to think more about that. And that's what's happening. And you've got lots of nudges and prompts in your head thinking, yeah, I remember that's better, that I need to think about that. And they're doing it when they're on their own, not just when the observers come around. So there we go. I mean, that's the basic idea, and I hope you found it useful. Simon, I'll hand back to you then, and I don't know if I'm going to wrap things up, but anyone wants to
Hugely
contact
useful.
me.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really, we love the way that you bring such a human lens to the work of teacher development and improvement, right at the core of a deep respect for the profession, seeing experiencing in the classroom that matters, but how we can really supercharge that through the use of evidence and being evidence informed. For those of us coming in from Australia, I know we've got people coming in globally. There is a really big national push to think hard about research engagement at the moment. And I think you've really gifted us with a couple of key things. Firstly, this idea of precision, getting beyond just descriptions of principles and strategies, but getting right down into techniques and actions and steps. And so I think the work you've been leading and demonstrated to us is really, really useful there. This idea of engaging in collaborative dialogue and decision-making about a core, and not being caught in this sense of, oh, well, that's something that we already do. Does it really belong in there? But not, will we do it or not? But to what extent are we doing it as well as we could? And where is it turning up? And I really think this idea of getting out of the binary and getting into a real continuum of expertise, and how well are we doing it and in what circumstances? And then, of course, thinking about the structures that enable this, getting away from a really simplified view of just inform the teacher about this strategy and moving through some real steps that align with, say, the Evidence Endowment Foundation's findings around building knowledge, motivating teachers, demonstrating practice, enabling people to embed. So it's been great to get an update of your thinking. I'm a huge fan of that problem solution kind of way of thinking, because it gets away from top-down, teacher, we want you to do these things, and much more, hey, teachers, what are the learning challenges that you're grappling with, and where might some research-informed practices be well field-tested and feasible approaches to solve that problem. So, Tom, many of us here are going to be joining you live in October. We can't wait to have you here. For those who haven't decided to join us yet, we would love to have you part of our community in Sydney or Melbourne. Please do consider joining us for that conversation. We're going to be going deep in some case studies and some updated thinking. And for those new to the work, or for those who are 4 or 5 years deep, there's going to be plenty of things for us in the work we're doing. So big thanks to you, Tom. Thanks for those who've joined. We'll share a brief summary of some of the core slides out and the recording over the next 24 hours. Thanks so much for being here, and hope to see you in the flesh sometime soon. Tom, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we're going to close off now. Tom, it's been great to have you. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
and
speak to you soon, everyone.
All right, thanks
See
so
you
much.
in October.
Bye.
Bye.